You and I need to say what God says about us, what God says about our situation. You see, you are who God says you are. You can do what God says you can do, and you have what God says you have. But for that to materialize in your life, you need to believe it, and you need to speak that thing. And then Joshua 1:8, this book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. In other words, you and I are supposed to say what God says about us, about what God says about our situation. We're supposed to be speaking in agreement with what God says. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate therein day and night. Now, the second part is equally important to the first part, because you'll never do the first part unless you do the second part. Right? It says meditate therein day and night. In other words, you spend time thinking about, musing, literally speaking what God says. It's meditating on the Word. And that's how it gets in your heart. Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So it's not a matter of you're just saying something, right? A parrot can do that. It's got to be in your heart, right? We believe in our heart, therefore we speak. Romans 10 in verse 8. But what does faith say? The word is near you. It's in your mouth and in your heart, even the word of faith which we preach. You know, sometimes we think the answer is a long ways away. We think the answer is in Africa. We think the answer is in Fenton, Missouri. We think the answer is someplace else, somebody else. But the Bible says the answer, it's near you, it's in your mouth, and it's in your heart. Right? So we have to connect what's in our heart with our mouth. They've got to be speaking the same thing. So to begin with, I want to quickly jump over to the first book in the Bible, the book of Genesis, which really has about 2,000 years of human history in it, literally from creation to Abraham. Chapter 1 and verse 2. So chapter 1, God creates the heavens and the earth. Verse 2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Other translations say gross darkness. Others say it's catastrophic, right? And the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. Then God said. So we get to the third verse in the Bible, and already it's about speaking. And then God said. Now remember, the Bible says that it's void, it's dark, gross darkness, catastrophic. God looks at it, and he does not say, wow, that sure is dark. That's like the darkest place I've ever seen. God did not say what he saw. God said what he wanted. And he said, let there be light, and there was light. And then 5 more times in the chapter, God said, and then he saw. And he said, and then he saw. And he said, and then he saw. In verse 26, the first thing God said when he made man was, we're going to make him in our likeness, according to our image, and let him have dominion. Let him have dominion. So you weren't made to be a doormat. You were made to have dominion. Now, how is that dominion released? How is it brought forth into this world? Look into the second chapter. God brings all the animals to the man, and he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. Listen. And whatever man called each living creature, that was its name. The man named the cattle, named the birds of the air, named the wild animals. Now, we just think name like dog, cat, cow, right? But in the Hebrew, it means character or reputation. In other words, Adam spoke, And what he said about that creature was the character of that creature. He wasn't just putting a title on them. He was speaking, and what he spoke about the creature is the character that the creature came to possess. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. Then, of course, in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 9, it says that God created the man, verse 7, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The New King James says he became a living soul. Others say a living being, right? Others say a speaking spirit. Man became a living soul, a speaking spirit, right? Now, the same way that God used his voice to speak and use dominion, man is to speak and use his voice to have dominion. In Romans 10, in verse, well, let's just jump over to Mark 11 and see if we get very far past that, all right? Mark 11, Jesus is staying in Bethany at the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. It's about 3 miles outside of Jerusalem. So he would leave their house and go up the Mount of Olives and come down the Kidron Valley and then right into the temple where he was going to preach. But apparently, Mary and Martha slept in that morning because Jesus didn't have breakfast. So on his way, he sees a fig tree, and it's got leaves on it. So he says, they're going to be figs. And he goes to the tree, and the Bible says he finds no figs on the tree. And the Bible says that he cursed the fig tree and said, no one ever eat fruit from you again forever. Now, Jesus cursed the fig tree. Jesus did not say, you blankety blank, blank, blank tree. That's not what he did, but he cursed the tree, right? And he said, no one ever eat fruit of you again forever. He spoke negative, death-bringing words to that tree, right? And then we're going to see the tree dies, right? Now, you can curse your health. You can curse your children. You can curse your finances. You can curse your job. And it's not a matter of saying 4-letter words. But when you begin to speak death and you begin to speak negatively about situations, death and life are in the power of your tongue. That's why Joshua 1 verse 8 says, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. You and I need to say what God says about us, what God says about our situation. You see, you are who God says you are. You can do what God says you can do, and you have what God says you have. But for that to materialize in your life, you need to believe it, and you need to speak that thing.